So functional analysis and functional behavior assessment is what we are going to be going over today, and I've made a PowerPoint to kind of make the flow a little easier. So to begin with, for introductions, I am Allie Smith. I'm currently working in an in-home setting providing behavior management services through the Medicaid waiver. So I'm not in a clinic or anything like that. It's definitely a little bit different than everything that we've talked about. There's been some discrepancies, and my VCBA has been helping me along through those. My goal ultimately is actually to work in a clinic and then continue providing consultation services to my current place of work to continue educating them on some easier things, a little bit more that they can implement in in-home settings. And then my experience with behavioral assessments. So at my current current place of work, we do functional behavior assessments, but there's definitely some differences there. I've been doing them for a little over a year and a half, but I've actually been with the same place for several years, so I've had hands-on experience with them for probably at least 5 years, of at least observing someone doing them and then practicing it on my own too. So when to determine how to conduct a functional behavior assessment, it is noted that current practice guidelines suggest that the assessment and treatment of challenging behavior should consist of conducting a functional behavior assessment following the onset of a problem behavior. So short summary, whenever there's a problem behavior, we conduct a functional behavior assessment to determine the root of the problem behavior function. So then, again, behavior analysis should do so to identify effective, precise, personally relevant, and humane treatments for problem behavior. So relating to that again, we want to find that problem behavior and then find a treatment to eliminate that problem behavior in the most effective, precise, and personally relevant and humane way possible. So then that leads to the question of what constitutes as a problem behavior? And short answer, problem behaviors can consist of, but they're not limited to, any kind of self-interest behavior, aggressive behaviors, socially unacceptable behaviors, and behaviors that impact learning opportunities. So for example, self-interest behavior, headbanging, cutting themselves, things like that. If more severe, excuse me, aggressive behaviors, hitting, kicking, really physically interacting with somebody in an inappropriate way. Socially unacceptable behaviors, yelling in public settings, something that's not going to be appropriate whenever you're in the store, in school, behaviors that impact learning opportunities. So again, when you're in school or you're in a learning situation where you can't sit still long enough to focus on something, or you're trying to redirect the conversation many times, very broad examples, but similar to those. So the difference between a actual functional analysis and a functional behavior assessment, a bit formal here. The functional analysis, the term functional analysis was used by Skinner in 1953 to denote empirical demonstrations of cause and effect relations between environment and behavior. And then the functional analysis, as defined by Cooper, a functional analysis is a term with two meanings in contemporary behavior analysis literature. Its original and most fundamental usage, functional analysis, denotes demonstrations of functional relations between environmental behaviors and behavior, or environmental variables and behavior. In the context of determining the purposes, functions of behavior for an individual, functional analysis entails experimentally arranging antecedents and consequences representing these in a person's natural routines so that their separate effects on the problem behavior can be observable and measurable. So short summary would be, again, we're just determining that function of the behavior. So we're just strictly focusing on the behavior and the function of the behavior, and we're leaving out all of the fluff. That's where the FBA comes into play. And by fluff, we'll go into that a little bit more after I read these definitions. Again, defined by Cooper, a systematic method of assessment for obtaining information about the purpose, functions, of problem behavior served for a person. Results are used to guide design intervention for decreasing the problem behavior and increasing appropriate behaviors. Cooper also explains that FBA methods can be classified in 3 different types. A, the functional experimental analysis, B, descriptive assessment, and C, indirect assessment. And then Cooper again also explains that a FBA can be used to assist in determining the best intervention for decreasing that problem behavior or increasing the problem behavior. It can identify antecedent variables that can be altered to prevent problem behavior. It can identify reinforcement contingencies that can be altered so that the problem behavior no longer receives reinforcement. And it can identify reinforcers for alternative replacement behaviors. So kind of what I'm understanding by fluff, functional behavior assessment has a little bit more to it. It's kind of the bigger portion of it. It usually obtains a functional analysis within it, but it definitely has more direct observation, indirect observation. You're getting all the information from all these resources and using it in one bigger document where you can demonstrate where the function is relating to the behavior, and then being able to use all the information to, again, make a plan that's going to be best fit for your client. So within my current field work, we use FBAs, and within the FBAs, we do our functional analysis. And again, as I said before, it's definitely a little different than what I've been seeing in the readings and learning about throughout this course. Whenever we do our FBAs, they're pretty extensive. They take a long time. However, there are also times where it'd be more appropriate to use that functional analysis to make it a little easier. Typically, whenever there's a new target behavior that is coming up or that we're wanting to work on within, that time frame, our functional behavior assessments, when we do them initially, they're set for about a year standard is the time frame that they should be reviewed. It doesn't mean they can't be reviewed before or after. That's whenever we need to absolutely redo them. However, whenever we redo an FBA, we have to redo the whole thing. We can't just redo the functional analysis part. And that would be very beneficial in a time constraint wise, where if we just could redo the FA and leave it at that versus redoing the entire FBA and going through that process again, it definitely, it's time consuming. And again, like this says here, when there are the time constraints, mainly that's just the biggest issue that I see. So whenever we conduct our functional behavior assessments in my workplace, we do it in fairly good order. I really like the format of them. However, again, there's just some discrepancies, and that's okay. We begin with looking at the referral that we get from the case manager and identifying what that problem behavior was initially for the referral. And then we start looking at any other documentation that may have been provided to us throughout the Medicaid waiver process, and it'll be on the portal, and we can look at all the information there. So any kind of person-centered goals or individual plans, the old BSP, any kind of incident reports, things like that. We'll then conduct a biopsychosocial social history, and that is basically through the time frame of when you start from point A to point B. So generally it takes about 45 days is our submission date. So for the whole 45 days typically is whenever we're conducting that biopsychosocial social history, and that's just getting the the narrative of the person's life to the best of our abilities within that very short time frame. So when we do this, we're doing our research, we're communicating with the family members, we're communicating with team members, reviewing those past documents, any kind of medications that they're on, communicating with doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, schools, any other services that they may be involved in. During this time, we also like to get a good feel of their daily schedule or their weekly schedule, so we know what they're doing within their week. Are they in school? Are they in daycare? Are they doing other services? Are they in a sport? Are they anywhere else in the day? What does that generally look like? What time do they wake up? What time do they go to bed? We would like to know their whole day. And then we would like to complete a QOBF and a FAST, so the questions about behavior function, and the functional analysis screening test. Whenever we do these, we are trying to determine the function of behavior through that indirect and direct observation. So we'll do the assessments to have that indirect questionnaire going through, but then we'll also use our direct observation to get the feel of really what that function of behavior is. And where we lack in this area is we don't run that trial of, is this correct or is this not correct? We keep the hypothesis and then we move on. There is no trial in this. So it's not a true FBA in this sense, and that's where that one of those discrepancies is. So then after this part, we will obtain any information that we would relate to, or that would relate to support being provided. So if there's any cultural differences, if there's any family background that we need to know about, such as any kind of substance abuse history, what the IQ is of the family members, what it is of the client, any kind of personal beliefs that these families may have that would impact how we provide treatment and how we interact with them to make sure they're the most comfortable and the most involved in the treatment as possible. And then we will conduct an initial preference assessment. And again, this is definitely not as much of the preference assessment as I would like it to be. It's very straightforward, more so along the lines of those observations of seeing what they like and asking them what they like versus doing a traditional preference assessment. And then we will also obtain any kind of ABC data, so the antecedent behavior consequence data. We will conduct this while we were there and collect it, and also train the family or staff members on how to do this, and then have that expectation that we need this data to be able to find out the true function of the behavior so we could get a plan that's going to work best for this family. So like I kind of mentioned too a few times, how long does it take for the behavior assessment process to take from getting it in? For us, we have 45 days. Doesn't mean that it's going to take them 45 days. And sometimes it means it may take longer than 45 days, unfortunately. And that is very dependent on a lot of things. We provide work and consultation in homes. So, meetings are not as frequent and as long as they traditionally need to be. It definitely takes longer to observe because if you're meeting with a client one time a week for 2 hours and that's that time frame that you have, that's not a lot of observation. And within 45 days, that's like 3-4 times to actually see them depending on the week. And then if you're going to see them more often, you have to make that time to actually set aside the time to the FBA because we have, many clients and it's harder to actually sit down and focus on one thing with a lot of documentation such as that. And then it definitely takes longer to obtain all that additional information just because, again, we're only seeing these people every so often. And, life happens and sometimes it's just that's not happening. You're not getting there that day because of X, Y, and Z. They're sick, you're sick, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very long process. So some of the tools and graphing methods that we use, like I mentioned, we use the FAST and the QABF within our FBAs, as well as the direct and indirect observation. We also use the generic ABC data tracking forms in the beginning to obtain initial information for the targeted behaviors. They're very straightforward, ABC, and little section for notes, nothing too special. They'll get more in-depth and personalized as we actually determine the behavior and go from there. We ask the parents to collect data too and staff as well. And like I mentioned earlier, we train them on how to do so. And then depending on the behavior, depends on the type of graph that we use. Typically, we use a bar graph or a line graph. Here is a brief picture of the FAST. I believe everyone has probably seen this, nothing new. And then again, here is a very small demonstration of the QABF. Again, I believe everyone has seen this. If not, it is here. So in conclusion, kind of what I would like to learn more about, I think I would just more so like to see a traditional FBA and an ABA clinic setting where I could really get the grasp of what all goes into it in a different world. Like I said, where I work is not a traditional ABA. I'm actually the only one there who has any ABA knowledge other than my ECBA, which we hired on as a consult mainly for me, for my supervision, and to provide consultation and trainings to us while she's supervising me. So it would just be nice to actually get the hands-on experience of doing a traditional FBA. And then how do the assessments conducted in your field experience placement compare to what you learned in the coursework? Very similar to what I just said. They don't really. They do, but they don't. They're much more different. I feel like the ones that we've read about and learned about are much more in depth and very straightforward. And they're very cohesive. And I feel like the ones that I've been doing, not that they're not good, there's nothing negative about them. I just feel like they could be more in depth and just more fluid. So some questions I have would be more so relating to those within an ABA clinic as far as their preference before an FBA or a FA. Where does that stand? What does everyone think on those terms? And then what are some other reasons to conduct a FA over an FBA or vice versa? Why would you conduct an FBA over an FA? And this is clearly because I really don't know. That's a good question for me. I've only been introduced to the one form, so, well, I've been introduced to both, but I would like to know everyone else's opinion on when within a clinic what that looks like. And then how long does it take for someone else in a clinic or somewhere else in a setting to conduct that FEA or an FA? How long does that take? Because I feel like 45 days is a long time. But again, when it's spread over, one time a week for 3-4 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks, sorry, I can't do math, it doesn't seem like enough time whenever it's, you add that up, it's like 10 hours. I feel like that's not enough observation for me, in my opinion. So I want to know how long it kind of takes someone else to do that. And then here are my references for this lovely presentation. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to seeing everyone else's. Thank you.